I'm Eric Dorr from the Gettysburg Museum of History, and I want to introduce a very good friend of mine, Mr. Mark Bando, who is graciously loaning us some new material for the Gettysburg Museum of History, some really important World War II 101st Airborne interviews that he conducted along the way. But I really wanted Mark to tell his story and give a little bit about his background, because what he's done over the years has been amazing, and without Mark, we couldn't be doing a lot of the things we're doing. So without further ado, Mark Bando.
Okay, if you want to know a little bit about Bando, I'm third generation Japanese American. I was born in Detroit in 1949. Both of my parents were born in the States too. They met in a relocation camp after Pearl Harbor, and they moved from the West Coast to Detroit after the war. That's how I wound up being born in Detroit in 1949. Anyways, I as a child was inundated with World War II documentaries on television from the time I was preschool, and by the time I started kindergarten, I knew a lot about World War II. When I think about how kids are now when they're 6 or 7 years old, I'm amazed how much I knew at that time. But anyways, I did a sleepover with a school buddy around 1956, and his dad had been in the 2nd Armored Division, and I kind of interviewed him, asked him about the war, and he got his shoebox full of souvenirs out, showed them to me and explained them to me. And a year after I met him, he passed away, and he died in 1957, so I know it was around October of '56 when I talked to him, and I was only 6 years old then. I might have just turned 7 in October. So he became my first World War II interview, and little did I know that in 1999 I would write a book about the 2nd Armored Division. It was just a coincidence that I met him. But anyways, I was a history major in college, and I started interviewing World War II vets from any division I could find in the late 60s. My main heroes from World War II were the 442nd Japanese American Infantry Regiment and the paratroopers. I always admired the courage of paratroopers. So it happened that a guy went to high school, his dad was in the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment. He came to school one day wearing his dad's Ike jacket with an eagle patch on it. And I said, "Hey, was your dad in the 101st? He said, "Yeah, so what?" I said, "Well, I need to talk to him." So I went over and interviewed him, I think in January of '69. That was my first 101st interview. He was in Cecil Simmons' company, and he was a pioneer paratrooper. He joined in '41. He was in the old 502 battalion, then he morphed into the 502 regiment. He missed Normandy because he broke his leg on a practice jump, but from Holland to the end of the war, he was in it. And then that led me to write a newspaper article about him for the 25th anniversary of the Bulge in December of '69, and that was published in the Detroit News. First thing I ever had published. I was 19 years old, and as a result of that, I met George Koskomaki, who was a 101st vet and a researcher, and he wrote 3 books about the division himself. And so I met him, and he gave me a current address roster with 100 names, addresses, and phone numbers of World War II 101st guys who lived just in the Tri-County Detroit area. And out of those 100 names, I interviewed 93 of them, and I wrote a 12 credit hour thesis on the 101st as part of my college curriculum. And then I started going to division reunions in 1971, and most of the 101st vets at that time were about 47 years old. Most of them didn't even have gray hair yet. And it was recent enough that they remembered everything. But I had a different perspective on it being a kid. I thought World War II was already ancient history in 1969. I thought maybe it's too late to get any information from these guys now. It's such a long time ago. That's kind of humorous when you think about it now. You got guys like Andy that are interviewing guys that are in their over 100 years old now. But anyway, so in the late 70s, the regiment started having regimental reunions and company reunions, and I went to them. And I kept phone interviewing vets, which was expensive to make long distance calls then, but the reason I wrote about the 101st instead of the 442nd was geography. All the 442 vets lived either on the West Coast or in Hawaii, not all of them, but 90% of them. But I had a wealth of 101st vets right in the Tri-County Detroit area. So I talked to as many of them as I could, and I kept phone interviewing and going to reunions, and finally, when I did my last interview was in 2016, the year my son was taken, and by then I had 1,100 interviews with 101st guys. I also wrote a book about 2nd Armored that came out in 1999, and I did over 300 interviews with those guys, and altogether I have over 1,500 World War II interviews, because I talked to guys from Big Red 1, 9th Infantry, 30th Infantry, and 1st Special Service Force, 82nd Airborne, whatever units I could find. I interviewed them. And now I have an archive with probably 60 video interviews with 101st guys, and I have a lot of just voice interviews on audio cassette tape.
Well, we really appreciate you loaning us these, and we can start archiving and maybe releasing a few of them. You already let us release the one with Jumbo that we put out a little bit ago, and his interview was instrumental in making our book Fierce Valor as accurate as it was. His account was amazing, but Mark has given us a couple more videos to use, and I just wanted to make sure his details were presented properly at the beginning of this video. So,
okay.
Mark, thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to add before we roll the interview videos? I mean, you have so many great ones, and you gave us some really good ones, so I'm real excited about it.
Yeah, we'll see how the public receives them. Naturally, there was a lot of interest in anything to do with spears, but
yeah,
the rest of the interviews are different people that are not as well known. So we'll see how it goes, how much interest there is, how well the public receives it, but I have a lot more that I can donate to this cause if you want them.
Yeah, and we do.
Want to see them.
We do. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Okay, we're on and rolling, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm Don Burgett, or Donald R. Burgett. I was in A Company, 506, 101st Airborne. 506 Parachute Regiment, Infantry Regiment. 101st Airborne Division, World War II. And of course, I made the Normandy jump, the Holland jump, and then I went the rest of the way with the division through to the end of the war. But what we're talking about right now is the jump into Holland. And we were trained for it. We didn't get all the training that we had in preparation for the Normandy jump, though. There wasn't the big elaborate sand tables, and there may have been, but not all of us got to see them. It wasn't the elaborate planning that they had for Normandies, but I do recall when we were in the marching area, and we were there for quite a while. And one day we loaded up on the planes, and it was a nice sunny day. It was in the morning. It's in September 17th, 1944. And we took off and turned like they always did, one C-47 following the other. We formed in the air, circled for quite a while, and when we got the formation together, we took off, and we were at a higher altitude. And this was a daylight thing, whereas Normandy was at night, and we couldn't see anything. Well, it took off in the daytime, but it became night, and we couldn't see much at night. But this one, we were well aware of the formation all morning. And then we straightened out and went across England, and the last thing I recall of England is looking down out of the left side of the plane and seeing the White Cliffs of Dover. Man, those things, they looked like they were an inch high, and we were really up in altitude. Whereas going into Normandy, we were very low, but we were up in altitude, and I saw the White Cliffs of Dover. for some reason I was really fascinated by them. We went across Europe and really received no anti-aircraft. And it was a nice sunny day, it was a fall day. And we went into the, across, and then we got the warning that we're coming into the DZ, and we stood up and hooked up and everybody got ready. There was a young replacement came in, he was in front of me, and I forget who was behind, Connie Bridges, I think, was behind me, and another guy behind him, and finally Sergeant Vetlin, picking up somewhere near the end of the stick. And we came in close to the DZ, and we took up a jump attitude, and we started receiving flak. I mean, it was coming up pretty heavy. Not too much in the way of, there was machine guns, but not so many of them as there was in Normandy, but there was a lot of machine gun fire, but mostly 88. And the shell bursts were coming in. I saw a couple planes go down. And of course, we got the signal to go out the door, and that's what we did. We went out the door. There's a little story I don't like to tell, but I mean, the man tried. It was Connie Bridges. I don't know if you can add it to this later, but if you want, but Connie Bridges did not jump. The young ski trooper who was in front of me, a tall, young, blonde guy of Polish descent, had transferred into the troopers, and he looked out the port, and he said, "Is that flak?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Look out, you can see it exploding." And about that time, there was a hole that appeared in our port wing, which was about, a couple of feet wide, or maybe 2.5 feet wide, and about anywhere from 4 to 6 feet long. And you're strained, you see the surface of the wing, it's there, and all of a sudden it disappears. You don't even see the metal leaving. There was this big hole in there, and this guy in front of me, I can't even remember his name because he wasn't with us that long. He said, "Let's get out of this damn thing." So all of a sudden we got the signal to go, and we went. I learned later from Vetlin that Connie Bridges, who was following me out of the door, didn't jump. He froze in the door, and I guess Vetlin hit him real hard, knocked him to one side, and the rest of the stick came out. And anyway, he's the only man that I ever known that failed to jump, and he just had battle fatigue and should have been treated like that, but he wasn't. But anyway, when we went out the door, it was, like I said, a bright sunny day. I figured we went out 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet. The opening shock, plenty of time, not much wind, not much drift. You can see all the fields. You can see a big drainage ditch, haystacks. And this was the first time that we used the quick release. In Normandy, we had all the releases had to be done individually, and by the time some men got out of them, they were killed, either knife, bayonet, or a shot. And I guess the chutes that we jumped in were called the T5s, and when they put the British quick release on them, they called them the T6. And there you'd pull the pin, turn it, hit it, and it would fall off. You just undo your belly band. Then I remember coming down, and the flights that were coming in behind us were still crossing the field. All the planes kept good formation, tight, proper altitude, heavy flak. They didn't stray off the course. The pilots were right on the ball on this one. And I saw one plane coming right towards me, and he was losing altitude, and he was trailing smoke. And I knew I was going to go through the prop. Either that or I'd be hit by the wing. And instinctively, I pulled my feet up. I saw it coming. I could see the pilot, and his eyes were that big around. He was wearing a 50 mission hat, bashed in, and I could see the co-pilot, and his eyes were that big around, and his stick was shaking, or the yoke. And men were bailing out. I mean, they were coming out the stick. He was holding the plane until all the men cleared. And the plane went underneath me, and I could see the tail rudder, the vertical stabilizer go by, and then the tail by, and I had my feet up, and it went virtually underneath me. And I was fascinated by it, and I watched it, and it hit the ground, and the right wing went in, and it cartwheeled, went across. All the crew was killed. But the pilot held it, and all the men jumpers got out. And anyway, we got down to the field, and I met with Phillips and some of the other guys, and we got together. And Phillips was taking K rations apart, and he's ripping the boxes open, and he was sticking the best parts, like some of the stuff he didn't want. Leave it, he said, well, you know, take the canned meat, take this, take that, take the coffee, take what you wanted, the cigarettes, and then throw the rest away. So he stuffed them inside of his jump jacket. And we had seen the plane go down. I said, well, the way that plane hit, and it didn't explode or anything. It didn't burn, but it hit, and it was totaled. And I knew that the crew was killed. And one guy did come down, and a lot of the guys, when they had these quick releases, they said, well, they wanted to get out of them in a hurry, so they just pulled the safety pin and had some of them even turned, and they had their belly band off, and they that way when they hit the ground, all they had to do was flip their reserve chute, hit this thing, and it would fall off. Well, one of the guys, his chute opened, and he came out of the chute. And the chute drifted off by itself, and he came down, and he was Doc Saint. That's our company medic. He was from New York. He was with us, and we watched this guy come down, and there's these haystacks. They were stacked like bales of hay, and then they were put on a pitch so the rain would run off, and they were thatched. So the guy came down, he hit the edge of without a chute at all. He hit the edge of the haystack. He ricocheted, hit the ground, and his arms, you could see his arms and legs windmilling, and as he kept rolling around the ground, they kept getting smaller. All of his bones were breaking. And I asked Doc Saint, I said, you going to him? He looked, and he said, no sense in going to that one. So he just turned around, we walked, and we was going down along the side of this ditch. And about that time, was going towards the woods, and these two gliders came in overhead. The gliders were starting to come in about this time, and they were hitting the field, and some of them smacking into each other. And about 75 to 100 feet over our heads, the two gliders were trying to get into the same field. And as they came in, the one on the right was higher, and this one came in, and as it came around, the lower one's right wing hit the left trailing edge of the one up above. And he hit, and when it hit, it spun him this way. At low altitude, he came down, and he just made a quarter turn, and he hit the road. And the Jeep broke loose and came forward, and then this other glider spun out the other way, and he went down. So we stopped and tried to help get the men out. They were alive, and we tried to get them out of the glider. And I was trying to break some plexiglass. I was on my knees there, and somebody said, we have a mission, you know, we've got to be there, so let the other guys were there, so let them take care of it. So we got up and left. And as we walked along this drainage ditch, it was one of the pilots who had crashed and survived, and he had just the steel part of a helmet, and he was down in the bottom of the ditch going along with us, and he was watching us, our progress, and he stayed along with us. We'd stop, he would stop, we'd move, he would move, but he's holding the steel part of the helmet with his left hand. He had his 45 in his right hand. I said, come on up here. He said, nope, I'm staying down here. He said, that's your job up there. So anyway, we went on, and we went through a fence, and our present first sergeant at that time was carrying a bolt action 30-06 in 03. It was his personal rifle. He had it accurized. He had his father send it to him from home, and he was. Well, this first sergeant, he had his 30-06 bolt action that was accurate, and he had his father send it to him. And before the jump, when we were back in Airborne, told me that he was going to send home and have his dad send him that rifle, and I advised him very strongly not to. I said, when you're in combat, you could have your rifle shot out of your hands, or you could be wounded. You're not allowed to carry it through the medics. And I said, any number of things could happen and you would lose it. I said, it's better just take the M1. It's just as accurate almost, you know, for all your needs. You're not going to be shooting that far. And the M1, you just slap the 8 rounds in, fire, and it ejects the empty clip, and you reload again. And I warned him very strongly. I said that if you take your own personal weapon in there, the chances are you're going to lose it. And he said, no, he said he wasn't going to lose it because he could hit a man at 1,000 yards with it. And in combat, you very seldom get a 1,000-yard shot at anyone. Even in Holland, where the dikes were that far apart, you just didn't get a shot at him. But anyway, he insisted on taking his rifle in, and he did get wounded later in the woods there, and was very shortly after that, and I had never saw him again. And I don't know what happened to his rifle. I have seen, since then, I saw a photograph of him coming through the gate, and it was, of course, as later on in years, it's been reported to be different people, but that was the first sergeant at that time of A Company 506, and he was carrying, if you look close, you can see he was carrying a bolt action 30-06-03, which was not issued to everyone. And, excuse me. But anyway, just before that, before we got to the gate, after I was talking to the downed pilot who was in the bottom of this drainage, it wasn't irrigation ditch, it was a drainage ditch. The road running parallel with the ditch made a 90-degree left. There was woods on the right, and there was an ambulance that was hit by bomb. And we were told at the time there was a couple of civilians there at that time. And they said that the American fighter planes came over and they knew something was going on because they came in low around these big open fields and they strafed and they bombed. And this ambulance was driven by one of the women in Zahn. She was a resident there. She was a civilian nurse. And she went out to see if there was any wounded or anything that she could help, and she was driving the ambulance, and she was heading back towards Zahn, and she was strafed and bombed by an American fighter plane at low altitude. The one bomb totally destroyed the left front of the ambulance, and her body was mutilated almost beyond recognition, and her body was lying outside of the ambulance. The ambulance didn't burn, though. It was just destroyed by impact. And her body was laying there just, I couldn't even tell it was a woman when I walked by her, and we almost stepped over her. And anyway, we went on past this, and then we went through the gate where the first sergeant was carrying his 03, and we entered the woods, and about that time there was a lot of explosions, and I was angry, instantly angry. I thought the men ahead of me had tripped some booby traps. And you feel that they should watch, don't hit a tripwire, all these explosions, they started hitting and hitting. We did not hear any shells coming in, and so as I hit the ground, I thought those weren't booby traps, those are mortars, 81 mortars. Because mortars, you usually don't hear them coming. And so I said, there's too many of them to be booby traps, and I said, there are 81 mortars. Now they kept hitting and slamming us, and then they said, keep going, move forward, we got to take the bridge. So we kept going through the woods, and I know I went quite a ways forward and into the woods, and it gets kind of confusing. I know we were hit real hard, and there was 88 shells slamming into us, and there was small arm fire, machine gun fire, and I went back, I pulled back a little ways, and Captain Davis was hit there. And as we were going toward our objective, Captain Davis was to our right. And a medic started working on him. And some more shells hit, and fragments hit Captain Davis again. And then he was hit a third time. And at that time, this medic, the captain kept telling the medic that was working on him, he says, go on. He said, leave me alone. Take care of the others. And the medic said, no, I'll take care of you. And then the third rounds hit, and the medic was hit in the left arm. I recall seeing the blood running out of his left arm. And he still worked on the captain, and the captain was hit all through the legs then. And the medic started cutting at his pants legs, and then finally he was hit again. And then the captain looked at the medic, and he said, you better hurry, boy, they're gaining on you. So, yeah, that's the way he was. He never did lose consciousness. And then, of course, I was up and running again. About that time, some shells hit real heavy from the front. And at that time, Paul Carter, was on the machine gun. Borchers was his assistant. And I forget, there was a couple others in there. But the shell hit direct and Carter was killed, Paul Carter. He was killed instantly. He was just about blown apart. And Borchers, I got up and ran just a little ways, and Borchers came by me, and he was walking. And he said, I can't walk. And he was completely he was walking unconscious. And all of a sudden he collapsed. And I saw him after we got out of Holland and got back to our base. I did see Borchers again. And the doctor said that way his leg was blown apart, that he couldn't have walked a step. And I seen him walk almost 100 feet before he collapsed. He had a 2-cell flashlight in his jump pants pocket, and the 2-cell flashlight was inside of his leg. The doctors removed it in the hospital. K rations were blown through his leg, chewing gum, potted meat. His legs were shattered, and he was gone a long time. He didn't return to us till we were well into Germany. But that's the way they used to do in those days. In any other war, that man would have been sent home. But he was pretty well riddled. Every man on the machine gun was killed, and shells were hitting real heavy. And then I went forward towards this large building, and Phillips and I was there, and Phillips went towards the right, and I ran towards the building, and then the glass started breaking in the building from all the shelling, and they started coming down in big shards, and I knew I'd be impaled by one of them. So I rolled away from it, and then when I did, I saw a friend of mine, it was George Newport, and we had drank beer together and everything, and back in England, he was a replacement that came in after Normandy. And all paratroopers are required to wear their full Class A uniform going into combat and put your jumpsuit over it. I've always wondered about this, and they said, well, if you ever get to where you take a place completely, you can pull your jumpsuit off and look nice for a parade or something. But anyway, that's they require that you wear a Class A uniform and put your jumpsuit over it. Well, George Newport didn't have a clean shirt at the time that we got ready to jump into Normandy, so he borrowed, we were both the same build at the time, and so he borrowed my shirt, one of my shirts. And anyway, when I saw him, he was dead, and his head was completely severed down. And his brains were gone. I could see the inside of his skull. I could see little ripples inside of his skull. The eye was still in it, and half his tongue. Just like a bandsaw had cut him straight down. He was hit by a splinter from an 88. And I was trying to take the ammunition off of his belt. He had a box of 30 caliber machine gun ammunition on the back of his belt, so I undid his belt and was sliding ammo off of it, because we never leave ammo behind. And when our more shells hit, and I rolled over on my back, and I looked up, and the other half of his head was in the branch, and the eye was staring at me. And as soon as the shells let up, I was able to reach it with the end of my rifle, and I pulled the other half of his head down, and I opened his jump jacket, and I stuck it inside, and I buttoned his jacket up so it could be buried with him. And I took the ammo, and we went on with the attack. And about that time, everybody, like they usually do, they said, let's go, and we went running across broke out of the woods, went running towards the guns. The only chance you got is to take the people who are trying to kill you. If you stay there long enough, they're going to kill all of you. So we made the attack, broke out of the woods towards the guns, and this is where I differ with a lot of the historians. They say there was 2 guns there, but there was 3. There were sandbag encirclements, and there was 3 guns on our side of the canal. And we started running towards them, and we took the guns. One of the guns, they spiked the gun, and one of the men fired it, and it blew up. And that's the reason when the historians finally got there later, there was 2 guns, but the one gun, they spiked it, and it blew up and killed the crew and destroyed the gun completely. Destroyed the sandbags, the gun, the whole thing. And I remember when I ran towards the one gun, it was to my right, to the guns, the 3 guns was 1, 2, and 3, and I went towards the one here on the right. as I was facing the canal. And I seen it fire. They were firing, had them leveled, firing point blank. I saw the muzzle blast, and I felt the shell go by and explode in the woods behind. And I went up over the sandbags, and the crew quit immediately. They couldn't reload, and they didn't have any arms, small arms that I know of, unless it was a pistol, a P-38 or something. And the one guy that was, I don't know if he was the gunner or what, but he was on this side, and he fell on his back, and he was crying like a baby, and tears running out of his eyes. He was yelling 999, and I came down with a bayonet, and I was going to impale him with my bayonet, and he just put his arms up behind his head, and I don't know how I even stopped, because I had already started the downward thrust, and I stopped, and he was big, and he said, 9, please, and a bit, and so I stopped in time, and anyway, the gun crew surrendered, and the other ones did, and we ran towards the bridges, and the Germans blew them. I blew the bridge, and it was a wooden bridge, and I know Phillips and I, we hit the ground side by side, and there was an explosion like, I haven't been in too many explosions that was that big, that heavy, that close. And the whole bridge disappeared, and we were lying on the ground, and I remember looking on my roll over my back, and I looked up, and I saw this, I thought it looked like a piece of a toothpick. And I could see this twisting very slowly, just like in slow motion, twisting around and around. I said, hey, Phillips, look at that. And he said, yeah, that went up high. And then it started coming back down. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I got scared because it was coming right down, and you don't know exactly where, you don't know which way to run. But I knew it was huge, and this thing all of a sudden hit, and it didn't hit over maybe 40, 50 feet from us, and it impaled right into the ground, and we could feel the shock wave from it. And I think this beam was like 2 or 2.5 feet square and about 30 or 40 feet long. And when it hit the ground, you could just feel the impact of this big beam when it hit. And of course, we did get towards the bridge, and there was no way to cross, and we set up on our side of the canal, and then we took up a defensive position. And I don't recall digging in. It seemed like we were just scattered around waiting for something to happen. And you are running. So anyway, going back where the shells were impacting and the glass shards were coming out of the windows. When I found George Newport there, I saw him dead. There was a lot of dead at that time. There was a lot of wounded and a lot of dead. That was the glass shards or broken glass was coming out of the hospital that was there, and George Newport was killed within about 50 feet of the hospital walls. Then after we left there was we had lost most of our company in the shelling through either wounded or killed, and we had lost, like I said, non-coms, officers, men, but we were down to 2 officers. And at the time that we were still trying to secure a defensive area, there was the 2 officers realizing that there was only 2 of them. Each one wanted to take command. Well, Lieutenant Borelli was in the company longer. He had seniority with the company, but he was a second lieutenant. Lieutenant Rattan, who came in as a replacement, didn't have the seniority with the company, but he was a first lieutenant. So there became a discussion of who was in command of the company, and of course Rattan says, I'm a first lieutenant, and that supersedes a second lieutenant. And Borelli said, well, I know my men, and I know what they're capable of, and I should be qualified to take over the company, since Captain Davis was out of the picture, and all the other officers were out of the picture, so we had 2 officers. And both of them discussing rather strongly who should have the right to command the company. I really don't know who took over the company at that particular moment. We went on with our attack, and we consolidated our positions. We didn't dig in for some reason, which is unusual. And so I don't know who really had command of the company at that particular time, whether it was Borelli or Rutan, but they did have some discussion on the matter during the fighting, But anyway, look, Colonel LaPrade was the battalion commander, and he got hold of a sergeant, a first sergeant, I think it was, and they in turn got hold of a rowboat, went across the canal, and they strung a rope and everything, and men started crossing where the bridge was blown out. They crossed over by rope in one means another. And then it came our turn. We was trying to keep a company formation. There wasn't, but it was all fragmented from the shelling and everything, and wounded, and we don't know who was who. Platoon leaders or platoon sergeants or squad leaders and nothing else, but we did cross the river at that point. And I remember going across the river myself on these ropes. And we got to the other side, and Phillips yelled, "Hey, look at that!" And there was a long brick building as you're coming away from the canal, facing towards Eindhoven. To the right, there was a long brick building and a small courtyard between that and the canal itself. And there was other buildings behind it, and there was an 88 sitting there. So actually there was 4 88s at the bridge and Zahn. There was 3 on our side towards the drop zone. One was demolished by the crew, and they killed themselves in the process. So that left 2. And this is when the later people came in to write history or whatever they did. They found 2 guns on the site instead of 3. But there was very few of them mentioned the other gun on the other side. Well, we went over and inspected it, and that gun was pointed straight up. It wasn't pointed horizontally. And there was several silhouettes of American aircraft painted on the breech part of the barrel. In other words, they had taken part in knocking down. I don't know whether it could have been, I don't recall how many there was. It could have been 5, 7, or 9 silhouettes on the barrel. You don't really count them. And I said, well, these dudes knocked down quite a few American planes. Well, we talked a little bit about it, but the gun was still in position, pointing straight up. It was not pointing down. So I said, well, at least he wasn't firing at us that I know of, because the gun is in an upward position. And so we, again, there was another company moving through us. I don't know whether it was D Company or B Company or who it was. They moved through our positions. We were ordered to, I guess maybe because we were shot up so bad from the little woods thing there. But we were ordered to sit, and they allowed the other infantry paratroopers to move through us going towards Eindhoven. And one of the civilians came out, and he of this building, and he brought us some raw eggs, and he wanted us to eat them. And I said, I don't know how to eat those darn things. Well, he showed us. He said, well, you take and peck a hole in the end, and you suck the egg out. And so I tried it, and I said, I'll never do that again, because I was sucking out a thing. All of a sudden, the yolk broke through, and I think I swallowed that thing 5 times. But we thanked him for his generosity, giving up part of his food for us. And so anyway, it was later on we moved out and followed the other paratroopers that went ahead of us. And then we could hear a lot of shooting up ahead. And I said, boy, they're catching hell, or somebody is. And there was a lot of firing going on. You could hear it, small arms fire. Well, we were stalled alongside the road then, and I saw a German non-com. And he was lying on his back, and he had his hand sticking up like this, and a bullet had hit it square. It's like he was, waving to somebody in recognition or something. The bullet had hit it square, came out this side, and fragments of white slivers of bone were sticking out around the hole. And of course, he was shot up pretty bad. And so he had a rifle, and I took his rifle and stuck it in ground muzzle first, and put his helmet on so they'd have identification, had their name usually stenciled inside of it. And anyway, we moved on, and we were called to a halt again, and there was some dead Germans in a ditch to our left. And we were getting pretty hungry by this time because it's been some hours since we'd come off the DZ, and I stopped and I sat down on a dead German, and I was eating my K rations, and Phillips came up behind me and stuck a bayonet in his body. And he started laughing. He thought, it was Benson and Phillips, and they thought it was a joke. And so I reached over and I pulled the bayonet out, but it didn't come out easy, and I could feel like a little splinter of bone grating alongside the steel blade. And that kind of like rubbing your fingernails down a blackboard. It sent chills down me as I pulled the bayonet out. But that's the only time I've ever really pulled a knife out of a man, because I've been in bayonet attacks and things, but I have never stuck a man with a knife or a bayonet. And as long as I had a round in the barrel, I wasn't about to either. But anyway, I did pull the bayonet out of his body, and it would give me the chills when I feel like bone grating on the blade. And we moved out after we had been around these bodies. A lot of the Dutch people came out, and they said that they would be in the process of burying the bodies, and a lot of the younger men took the rifles, the German rifles, I recall that now, but and they would take a German rifle and they would tie a white handkerchief on their left arm, and that meant they were allies. In other words, you see a man running across the field with a Mauser in his hands and he had a white handkerchief on his arm, you didn't shoot him because he was an ally. And anyway, we'd left this point and was marching on toward Eindhoven, and Jackson, he was carrying the mortar, 60 millimeter mortar, and he was limping all the time. And I asked him what his problem was. He hurt his leg, and he said no, he caught 3 bullets in the right cheek of his butt. I said, why don't you go to the medics or have them take it out or something? He said, no, he said, they'll heal. And he never did go to the medics all the time that we were there, and they did heal, and as far as I know, he still has those 3 bullets still in him. And anyway, we went on from there, and we didn't really dig in. We deployed mostly to the right of the road, some to the left, most of us to the right. And it got dark, and we were waiting for the troops up ahead to move out. Like I said, I don't recall whether it was B Company, C or D or who it was, but anyhow, we were evidently bringing up somewhere along the middle or the last of the column that entered into Eindhoven. And we did deploy out on the sides of the roads, and why usually we dig in first thing, and even after that, all through combat, when you stop, you start digging, but for some reason we didn't dig in going into Zaan, and we didn't dig in at this time, but we spent the night on the way to Eindhoven, and we just more or less lay down in the field like a bunch of dogs and get up with dew all over you and dripping from your helmets, and no blankets or anything. But anyway, we got up and we did move out again towards Eindhoven, and we were supposed to meet the British there. And the people, this was a big celebration for them. They put on their Sunday best clothing and came out on the streets, and they was throwing apples at us, nearly all apples, and trying to share their food with us. And sometimes I thought they were throwing at us, not to us, because we were getting hit on the helmets with these apples and everything. And we went on into Eindhoven, marched in on foot, and because the British hadn't shown up yet, we were behind schedule. And we learned later that they ran into a lot of opposition on the way there. But as we got into Eindhoven, we made a left turn on one of the main streets, and we were told a sector to clear. We went down maybe 4 or 5 blocks down the main street to our left, which if we were marching south, that would be east, that we turned. And we went, at the same time, there was our walking wounded. I didn't know the men. There was from the company that preceded us, were marching a bunch of Germans, prisoners back. And they weren't marching in step. They were just more of a group, and they were marching a route step. And the only phrase I knew in German was "Du musst Esel," and I yelled that at them several times, and they looked kind of surprised at me, but all that meant was dumbass, and I don't know why I yelled it. Just one the only thing I had to do, I guess. But as we got in and got further down the road, we were told that I don't know if it was all of 8 company or it was just the 2nd platoon, but we were assigned to clear the tall buildings in Eindhoven. They were modern buildings, and Luke Easley at that time was he was from Peoria, Illinois, and he was acting squad leader. So I asked him how the hell we were going to clear these buildings, and he said, we'll just take the elevator up. And I didn't even know if they were working, but they were, and we got on the elevators, and we drove the elevator to the top floor, and we worked our way down floor by floor and cleared the building, went through all a lot of offices, a lot of rooms, and that's when Luke Easley found a bottle he thought was some kind of wine and had flowers on the label, and he drank part of it and became deathly ill. And we later found some more smaller bottles with the same kind of label, and it was aftershave lotion. And he thought he was deadly poison and was going to die, and he did get real sick. We carried him around between 2 of us for a while, and he finally got over it. But we cleared out, I would say, 4 or 5 major buildings, tall buildings, in the middle of Eindhoven, downtown area. And in each case, we never did run into an enemy in one of these buildings. I never even saw any indication of them being there, like, a swastika flag or helmet or clothing or something. Never saw anything like that. We went through the offices and the other rooms and never saw any indication really that it was German. And so we went up to the top floor and worked our way down. Each case, we took the elevator. It became like a lark, hey, let's go. And about 5 or 6 guys jump on the elevator. Top floor, please. When I would push the button up, we'd go to the top floor, and we'd work our way down. And we never did any looting or anything like you usually do, because there was everything was intact. But when you're in combat, how much can you carry, especially from an office, Well, we after we cleared out, evidently had supposedly cleared out these buildings, which we didn't find anyone in them. We didn't even find civilians in them. And we came back toward the center of town, and the Dutch police, we thought they were Germans at first. Their uniforms looked like a German Gestapo. They were black, high leather boots and so on. They were gathering up people, and they were taking them into a building. And it didn't take long. About 15 minutes later, these people, they would bring them back out, and they were tied. And several cases, they had a cart with a post in the center, and they would tie them to this post, and they were taking them out. And we asked what they were doing with them. They said they were German collaborators, and they took them in. They were pointed out by their friends and neighbors, or not friends, but their neighbors, so to speak. And say, yeah, this man worked with the Germans very closely. He caused a lot of deaths in our neighborhood. Arrests and so on. So they didn't take long with these people. They took them in there, they accused them, they tried them, they found them guilty, they brought them out, mostly on a cart of some kind. And they take them out a little ways out of town, and they shot them. It was just that quick. And then they took a lot of the girls who were sleeping with the Germans and fraternizing with them, and some of them had German babies, and they would take them and make them sit down in chairs in the middle of the street, and they shaved their heads. Wasn't actually shaving. They had little hand clippers that you would, the old-fashioned, not electric, and they would clip all their heads, clip them bald. And that's the way they had to leave. That was their punishment. Then they were forced out of town, from what I understand, because we could see maybe sometimes 6, 7, or 8 of these girls, bald-headed girls, going out of town together. And they just kept going until they would go. But where could they go? Because the next town they came to, they were still bald. And so anyway, after that was done, and we were kind of under British command at that time, and still taking command from our own command, and we were being shunted back and forth, pushed around, so you get kind of lost in this kind of mixing up, moving to this part of town or other. And then we finally ended up in a churchyard. And it was A Company, and we didn't know where we were going to go next. So we were in the churchyard when some of the British tankers, the British had entered by this time, motorcyclists, cars, those little Bren gun carriers and tanks, mostly Shermans and some Churchills and Cromwells. And so anyway, they came to us and told us that we had to move out of town, that the Dutch Underground had contacted them and said there's going to be a huge bombing raid that night in Eindhoven, and they was going to try to wipe out the Airborne. So we were assigned so many men each to a tank, and I happened to get on a Cromwell, large flat deck. And the British always complained bitterly about the Shermans. They called them tinder boxes. They said you get hit once with them, they go up in flames, whereas the Cromwell could take several hits. They were a better built tank than the Shermans, but I noticed they had 5 Shermans to each Cromwell in their armored columns, and also every tanker had a Smith & Wesson 38 revolver on his hip too, which came from the States on Lend-Lease. And I said, we got to talking about that while we were on the tanks. I said, well, you guys are going to pay all this back after the war? And they said, no. They said, the understanding of Lend-Lease is that they would use it during the war, and after the war is over, they'd give it back. So in other words, the American public footed the bill for it again. But anyway, we were on the tanks and we moved out of town. And on the way out, the tanks that I was on, we skirted in and out what was to be some kind of a huge girls' school, from what I understood. It had tall brick walls around it, a lot of trees, big buildings. And as we came around one of these buildings, in and out, like going through a labyrinth in town there, we were on board this tank, and all of a sudden the tanker stopped and said, "You Yanks have to get off." And we asked why. They said, "We're being fired on, small arms fire." And we didn't even hear that. We couldn't, with the running of the engine, we couldn't hear the small arms. We didn't even hear the bullets hitting the tank. But the tankers being inside could hear the impact of the bullets. So they came out and told us we were being shot at. Well, after a while, it stopped, so we got back on the tanks, and we were coming along one of these big buildings that I was talking about with a high brick fence, brick wall, and evidently a courtyard, and there was a small road or something, a driveway that came out from between the wall. And there was a Panther Mark IV kind of eased out on the road just ahead of us. He was very close, a couple 100 feet. And we saw just the front end of it, and it stopped for several minutes, and it would move out a couple of feet and stop for several minutes and moved out. And this tank commander, he was up in the turret, and he was had half his body sticking out of the turret, an open turret, and he was the only thing he kept saying, evidently he's talking to his gunner. He said, "Steady, steady, steady." And his voice was very calm, and finally this German tank came out of behind the brick wall far enough out into the road that he had a good shot at, and he said, "Now." Well, the British gunner fired, and boy, that German Panther just went all to pieces. He blew it up within a side hit with a direct. And the British, where we say, okay, we have a 75 millimeter or whatever it is, and they go by pounds. I don't know what this was, a 9-pounder, 7-pounder. Well, they hit it pretty good anyway from this Cromwell. Blew the German tank up. And we dismounted and we went around the corner to see if there was any German infantry backing the tank up, and we didn't find any. And we didn't see any more tanks, but we did go remount on the tank. And we went out of town, and we were in a field, but we were around these tanks, and the British, they would dig a pit and put canvas in it. And then they would all lie down in this tent, and then they would drive the tank over the pit, and all the crew would be underneath in this pit with the tank over the top of them. So we dug foxholes, and some of the troopers stayed in town. And what was surprising to us is that a lot of the young girls in town, the civilian girls, came out and spent the night in the foxholes with these guys in town, and some of them was dug in, another one took like one on the railroad there, he took advantage of the natural fortification of the train engines and so on, and the girls stayed the night with them there. I don't know what they did or nothing, that's their problem. But anyway, as they said, they mostly just kept them company. And a lot of the girls would bring out, with them, they brought blankets and food, and whatever, and they just went out and stayed with the GIs for the night. They were so happy to see them, I guess. But anyhow, my company was pulled out of Eindhoven, and we could see the town, and we could see the after the bombers got over, we could see the towers of the church that we were at in the courtyard. Had been there the day before, but anyway, the German bombers came over, and there wasn't really that mass of bombers. There may have been a dozen or so, and from what I could see, most of them were rather high flying, and they began dropping flares, and of course these flares they lit up the whole town, and one of the bombers got a flare stuck in its bomb bay, and it was lit. You could light up the whole bomber. Well, immediately the British had by this time set up anti-aircraft batteries in town, and immediately several of these searchlights converged on and locked in on this bomber and followed it across, and you could see the bomber in the searchlights, and you could see the big flare burning, and every gun in there opened up on that one bomber, and they followed it clear across the sky. In the meantime, the other bombers coming along in the flight were still bombing, and we watched that flare go clear out of range of the searchlights and out of range of everything, and in the dark we could still see this flare going over the horizon. So the plane, as far as I know, never did come down until it got ready to land, evidently. But he made it out of the area with a burning flare stuck in his bomb bay, lighting him up. And anyway, the next day we did come back into town again, but there again we were still on board the British tanks, and as we came into the main roads of Eindhoven, the people treated us like conquering heroes, and there again they kept throwing things to us, and a lot of them the convoy would stop, or that we was in, and people would ask for our signature, our autographs, and our name and address. And I talked to one guy. He was said he worked at Ford River Rouge, and the different ones that spent so much time in the States, and then different ones. Like one guy we had was from Chicago, and every time they say, "I'm from Chicago," and he'd say, "Oh, gangster." Everybody from Chicago was a gangster. And anyhow, we went back into Eindhoven, and later on, I don't recall how much time it was that we spent there, but then we were called and went back up through Zaan on our way back towards, as we call it, Vegel. I think it was Veghel, Vegel. I've seen something spelled since in Veckel. But anyhow, we went up back across, and this time when we got back through the area, it was pretty well situated. It was British had erected a bridge across, what they call them, Bailey Bridge. They erected a bridge across where the one was blown out. Tanks in the meantime were using the road quite freely, and so that was our trip back through, and then on our way back up towards going towards the 82nd area. Well, okay. Well, we moved back from Eindhoven, and we were going up, went back through Zaan, the bridge, and British in the meantime had constructed a Bailey Bridge across the canal, and the traffic was being pretty normal flow there. And we moved on up the highway, which was later to become known as Hell's Highway. And we went up through St. Odin Road, and we had a couple little firefight skirmishes on the way. We just passed our original DZ. And then we went on through to Veckel. And I believe at that time we called it Vegel, V-E-G-H, I'm not sure. And it was in this little town that we saw a big sign on the side of the road that said milk, and it was like a big dairy building or something there. And we asked one of the local kids if they had any milk there, and figured, there was a kind of a center for that, pasteurizing and so on. He couldn't understand us. Finally we said, milk. We pointed to the sign. He said, "Oh, melk." And he said, "No, there was none." So anyhow, we went on through, and this time period of marching up this road, maybe a couple, 3 days or whatever it took. And we went into Uden, and we were fighting through Uden and north of there, and we were supposed to go north toward Nijmegen, and we, from what I understand, there was an airfield that was captured by the, I don't know, it was the 82nd or the British, but anyway, the Germans had counterattacked, and they had taken back half the airfield, so we were supposed to go up and give them support in securing this airfield so they could bring supplies in when there were much needed supplies that had to be priority supplies that had to be brought in by air. So then before we got to the airfield, we received a message that the road had been cut by the Germans. So we did a 180 and marched back down the road towards St. Odin Road, and I didn't know the name of the little town, or even if it was a town at the time, until Mark Bando brought the map in that we have here. And just past this, excuse me, past this covering, we ran into the where the British convoy had been ambushed by the, we were told it was the British 6th Parachute, and
German 6th Parachute.
yeah, I'm sorry, the German British. So we were attached to the British 6th Parachute at the time, but this was the German 6th Parachute, and so we made the attack off this side of the road. And this may have even been in this little town here, but it seemed to me there was just a few farmhouses. Of course, that could be a town over in Europe. But we made the attack, and there was a haystack. We came over to the left of the road. It was starting to get dark. It was towards the evening. There was a haystack. We received fire from the haystack, and there was trees. A few trees that we were in, like a little wooded lot. And we received fire from the haystack, so small arms fire. So Vetland called to Montrella. He says, "Hey, drop a mortar round behind that from his 60 millimeter mortar." So Montrella set the mortar up, and of course he looked up and cleared the thing, see that the shell didn't hit any branches overhead. Fired one round, and it hit the top of the haystack. And Vetland says, no, he says, behind it, not on it. And he started laughing, and of course the rest of us started laughing. Then Montrella fired, I think, 2 more rounds real quick, made an adjustment, fired 2 more rounds. When they went off, we attacked forward, and I went around the left of the haystack, and others went around to the right. And there was bodies of either 2 or 3 Germans laying there. I don't recall just how many, it's 2 or 3. Of course, they were, dead, and no wounded. And then we made a right turn, went back across the road towards some buildings, which were farm buildings and barns. And we received some incoming fire, and it was like 20 millimeters fired at us from a long distance. And by this time it was starting to really get dark. And suddenly the farmhouse was set on fire, and it was burning. As we crossed the road, there was all these British convoy trucks. These trucks were all far. It seemed like at that one point you can't see too far, but when we looked to the right, there's nothing but smoldering trucks, and to the left there were smoldering trucks. So evidently the convoy had been ambushed sometime before we got there. The trucks had been set afire, looted and set afire, and by the time we crossed the road, they were pretty well burned out. Some of the tires and other parts were still smoking. It was still hot. And I recall as I started to run across the road, there was a dead British soldier lying on his back, face up, on a bunch of Cadbury chocolate bars, great big chocolate bars. So I stopped real quick. I grabbed him and flung him off the candy bars and started stuffing him inside my jump jacket. And so then we ran on across the road. And after we got across there, heading towards this farmhouse, which was was set afire, was receiving fire like from these 20 millimeters, and you could see the shells, the rounds coming through the air, just like a string of pearls. They were on, like, you know, you could see them. They were like tracers, and we went ahead, and suddenly Spear, he had real good eyes. He could spot those Germans. I don't care. I could look and look, even after he pointed them out. I couldn't see them. He could. He said, "There they are, there they are," and he's pointing to our left front. And so anyway, we started firing on them and knocked them out. There was a machine gun. They returned fire with a machine gun. We knocked them out. Some more fire came in from a distance from our right front, and a couple of our men was hit. And Creed was hit real bad. He went down, and we saw him in the hospital later, months after this was over, and he was really still shot up real bad. But anyway, we made the attack there, and I was running towards the barn, and Phillips and Spear was behind me. And got almost to the barn, and I cut to the left with the light of the burning building, and we went on and made our attack, and we finally cleared out the area, so we thought. And I think C Company was making another attack in conjunction with ours, but further south on the road, and they were cutting across the road, same direction we were, and we were supposed to join forces. Well, we had obtained our objectives long before they did, so there was Jackson and Vetlin and myself walked down the road to make contact with C Company. Where the little road came in, teed in, that ran parallel to the main road and teed into where we were at the farmhouse. So we walked down the road, and we could see from the firelight from the burning buildings, we could see C Company men all hunched over and running in short bursts. You know, they'd run forward, hit, and run. And so we started yelling at them, and we was waving. Finally, they saw us, and they said, "It's clear, come on up." So they started running towards us. So then Vetlin told me, he said, "You stay here, Burgett." He said, "You stay here and tell them where we're digging in at, so we won't be shooting each other. We make a connection here between the two companies." So Jackson and Vetlin walked back to where we had captured a bunch of these Germans, and they were putting them in the barn. And you could still see real well from the burning buildings there. And I was watching these men come running towards me. And so anyway, I heard somebody behind me said, "Hey." And I looked, and I didn't see anybody. I looked around, and like I said, it was getting dark, and just with the shadows of this burning building, everything's kind of flickering around. And I looked, and I could see the shadows of the C Company men running toward us. And so anyway, somebody yelled, "Hey, you!" And I looked around, I still didn't see one. "Hey, damn it, you!" And I looked down, and right there in the ditch, of course, this little narrow road with a ditch on each side, and there in the ditch was a German with a Schmeiser pointed at me. It's like 10 or 12 feet away. And we had been standing there, the three of us, and we didn't even see him there. And finally he said, "If I surrender to you, you promise not to shoot me." "What are you going to say? Stand there with a Schmeiser pointed at your belly." I said, "No, I wouldn't shoot you. You're a prisoner of war." He says, "Okay," and he climbed out of the hole, took me at my word. And he was tall. He was about 6'4", and slim, real tall. So I said, "Well," I said, "C Company's coming up." I said, "Let's go on back, and they'll know where we're at." And I said, "We'll go on back to the company where my other men are." So we started walking down the road, and he asked for a cigarette, and I smoked at that time, so I gave him one. And then he said, "Hey," he says, "you Americans like souvenirs. Do you want a souvenir?" And I said, "Like what?" He said, "Come on back." So we went back to the hole. He had German binoculars. He had a Luger. He had a P-38. He had a Schmeiser. He had a rifle. He had all kinds of stuff. And I said, "You want anything?" And I said, "No." I said, "I can't carry it. When you're in combat, you carry your own ammo and weapons, and that's it." So we just left it there. and I think some of them in the C Company probably got it. We got back to where we were walking side by side, smoking cigarettes, and we were talking. He spoke better English than I did, and walked up to the vet, and he looked around and he says, "Hey, Burgett, what the hell you got there?" And I said, "A German." He said he was standing right behind us with a Schmeisser when the three of us were down there. He said, "Oh my God." So anyway, I said, "Put him in the barn with the rest of the prisoners." So there was a couple of guys standing near the barn door, and I took him over there and he started going. Well, one of the troopers kicked him in the rear end. And I said, "Hey, don't do that." I said, I said, he could have killed me. I said, he was fair about it. And I said, I told him he wouldn't be hurt. And I said, I'll leave him alone. I said, I don't want to see him kicked again. So anyhow, that's where we spent the night. The next day when we awoke, somebody had taken all our prisoners. We moved on to another field and was clearing out. And in behind the farmhouse, we stopped there for a while, and we didn't have anything to eat for quite a while. And we were shy on water, anything to eat. And so we looked up in the one of the trees. I don't know which one of it was. We saw a big round cheese like the size of a basketball. Well, evidently the Dutch people who lived there had hidden this up in the tree when the leaves were on from the Germans. And now that it was later in the season, the leaves had gone and we could see this big round cheese up there. Well, I don't know who got it out of the tree, but somebody did. And there was a cow wandering around out back, and so Husto Korea got his steel helmet and he milked the cow, got milk. And there was several beehives. So Bilski and I took some straw and lit it and lifted up the beehives, and the bees came out. Of course, their wings burned, but we lit the straw and the bees burned them. So we got the honey. So that was our first meal in about 3 days. We had a helmet full of milk and several cones of honey and a big hunk of cheese. And I had a piece of black bread that I had taken from the body of a German. I looked in his pockets, looting, and I found this black bread, so I kept it. So we had the black bread, the honey, and the cheese, and the milk for our first meal in about 3 days. And then later we made another attack across the field north of there. We went down the highway, turned left, and when we went into the field, we were in a line of skirmishers, like from left to right, and we walked across this open field toward a wooded area, and suddenly this Sherman tank came up from behind us and pulled in with our ranks and just kept pace with us. So we walked along, and Philip said, "Boy, it's nice we have, a tank backup in case we get any heavy fire." And of course, then Vincent said, "Hey, that's Krauts." Of course, I argued with him. I said, "No, it's a Sherman tank. It's either, it's our British friends." And, "No, it ain't." So anyway, we argued back and forth. In the meantime, we're still walking, and the tank's keeping pace with us. So Benson crawled up on the back of it, and he got on top, and he started banging. He had a little carbine, and he started banging on the turret. The hatch, and finally the hatch opened up, and the tank stopped, and it was a German came out. So he pointed the carbine at him. He says, "Tell your buddies to get out of there." He said, all you Krauts, come out. So they did. They came out and surrendered. But here we were. The Germans told us they thought we were German paratroopers, and here we thought the tank was British, and here we were going along in the same direction, the same attack, and they were German, we were American. But anyway, they surrendered, and we sent them back with a couple of guys as prisoners, and we just left the tank there. I guess the British would pick it up, or somebody would, but it did have a black cross marked on it, and that's what made Vincent kept saying, "Hey, there's a black cross on this." And he said, "There's Germans inside that." We kept saying, "No, it isn't. It's American Sherman." But it turned out it was Germans. And we made an attack further into that woods then, and we killed quite a few Germans, and that's where I came up on a foxhole. There was an American in there, and he was bent over, his head had been over, and there's a bullet hole right down through the top of his helmet. And I thought, well, if somebody got that close to him, they could have at least demanded his surrender. And I said, didn't have to shoot him like that. And we started looking in the other holes, and there was a German in one, and I saw a little movement, and I told Phillips, I said, "This man's still alive." He said, "No, they're all dead." And I said, "No, he's still alive." So, I reached down and grabbed him by the jacket, and I yanked him out of the hole. And I started searching him, and he had a pocket watch. It was a cheap one, so I threw it away. And he had his legs pretty well broken up. And so anyway, he of course he surrendered. He had no other choice. But we said that the medic, we left him there. We said the medics would pick him up later. So whatever happened to him, I don't know. But we went on with the attack. And a lot of these little things, you go on the attack and you know you're in a firefight, but the little incidents, sometimes some of them stick with you and some of them don't, And so I remember that part of it. But anyway, we were finally relieved from that, and then in the days to follow, we had made our way back up towards Nijmegen. And when we came into Nijmegen, the road makes towards the river. You could see the river, but the road makes a 90-degree right. There was a park, greenery park on the left. On the right-hand side, just as the road made a right coming back around to the left, heading north, there was a little sidewalk cafe type of thing. There was tables sitting out on the sidewalk, little round tables with chairs. And this is where the 82nd had their big fight, and they, of course, had, after a real fierce fight, they had finally captured the Nijmegen Bridge. And at the time that we got there, we walked across the bridge. And there was no firefighting on us or anything. It was all over with when we got there. We walked across the bridge, and I was amazed that looking like 40 feet up under these big steel girders, there was hardly a place that you could put your hand on the steel girders. But what you would cover 3 bullet holes through the steel. But anyhow, we made our way across this bridge and to the other side. And then we went into, they came into what they called the jam factory. That's a big factory where they manufactured jam naturally. And so everybody had jam and crackers to eat all the time. Everything you had was jam. And the British were in Arnhem across the river, and at a later date we set up a thing to bring a lot of the British back. And I was on the shore that night when the British came in, and they came in rubber boats, and some of them were collapsible boats that was rubberized, and some of the British swam. But evidently they had a signal, which I didn't know anything about. They just positioned us on the shores of the river, and they told us to, any British coming back, to direct them to where they could get help. And what they did is they took this engineering tape. It's a white tape, a couple inches in width. And they laid that out about 100 yards away from the river, but running parallel with the river. And then every so often, off of this tape, they run a lateral of tape, which would guide the individual to a cellar. Follow that tape, like follow the yellow brick road, So the British would come off these little rubberized boats that's swimming in the water and so on, and we'd tell them, okay, go straight this way till you hit a tape and either go right or left. It's up to you. Follow that till you find another tape going off at a right angle, and follow that and it'll take you to a shelter. Well, that's what they did, and of course it took them to the cellars and basements and other shelters where they had hot tea, compo tea, and had, of course, biscuits and jam from the jam factory. And so we rescued a lot of British from across the river that night. And then we went on to Hoofdhuizen. And this is called the island that we were on, because the Nader Rhine runs on one side of it and the Rhine River runs on the other side. So it forms, they part at one point and then come back together, so it forms an island. And so we went into the Hoofdhuizen, and the British had gone in there ahead of us, and they were shot all to pieces. So we went in there next, and we got shot up real bad. The curvature of the river in relation to the land, made like a big horseshoe. The Germans held the other side of the river, so in this horseshoe, they could just about see all four sides of any house in there. So, anyway, we were in Eindhoven, and I don't know how long we were there either, but I know one time we started to make a move, and we were going into like a little courtyard, and in between two buildings, and the Germans threw rounds on us from artillery, and exploded right in the courtyard with us, and even into the walls of the houses, and I could see sparks coming from the brick houses and stone as the fragments, shell fragments, ricocheted back and forth. And for some reason, not one man got hit. Not one man. And we went through and made the attack, and then later we came back after we made our attack up through some tobacco fields, and we were hit heavy with artillery there. And I recall lying in a tire track that was made by a German truck during a rain, and the ground was muddy. So the dual tracks was wide enough I could fit into it, and it was about 2 or 3 inches down. So anytime you can reduce yourself 2 or 3 inches from the surface of the ground, you know that you either have a chance that a shell fragment or a bullet would either sever your spine or miss you. So you get down as low as you can. So we were laying in this tire track of the truck. We had some pretty heavy fire there, but when we went into Eindhoven, I remember we had to cross the main road, and we got up in behind some houses, and before we could cross the road, we had to clear the town to the right. Well, Phillips took over, and he said, "Follow me," and we went up and down these little narrow alleyways, and Phillips usually went ahead of us, and we went up to a stone wall and crawled over it, and we made sure there was cleared it of any Germans on the other side. We came back, we were fired on a few times. Then we came back into where we began, and getting towards the center of Eindhoven. And there was 2 paratroopers by a little wall, a short wall, maybe 3 or 4 feet high. And a German at the end of the road was shooting at him with a machine gun, and they would stick their heads up and try to see him. And they would duck down, and of course he would shoot at them. And they'd stick their head up, and they'd shoot, and they'd duck down. And as I got by them, they said, "Do you have any bazooka rounds?" And I said, "No, we don't." They said, "Well, they had a bazooka, but and this German with a machine gun was in a building shooting through a small slot in the wall." So they had a bazooka, but they didn't have any rockets. So we sent the word back down the line, and nobody had any rockets. We had a bazooka with no rockets. So we finally said, "Well, we just have to work our way around them." But I told these guys to keep their heads down, and they did. And they said, "Well, he can't hit nothing." And just they both stuck their heads up, and he hit them both to the head at the same time, killed both of them. And the man ahead of me ran across the road, and of course the German switched his gun and tried to hit him. He went into a building, and I ran behind him and went into the building, and he said, "Come on, I think we can make it around him." He went down the basement, and that's where we did. We went down the basement, crossed the basement, and out through a window on the other side, and ran across the next building, through the basement window, across the basement, out the other window. We were working our way basement to basement to get around this machine gun. Finally, I got close enough, and I yelled at this German machine gunner. I said, I said, "You'd better surrender now." He said, "Why?" And he'd fire a couple of bursts, and I said, "Because we've got tanks, we're bringing them up, and we'll blow you out of there." Of course, he said, "You ain't got no effing tanks, and we know it." So I said, "Hey, we didn't." So I said, "Where did you learn to speak such good English?" He says, "I have more time in New York City than you have." And so anyway, we shot back and forth for a little bit, and then this guy says, "Come on." So we went down the basement. He went out through the basement window again. There was a courtyard. And the courtyard was all like red bricks, and they were made into a real intricate design. There was a wall at the far end. And we got up. He said, "I'll go first." And he went out the window, and then I came out right behind him. We were running across the courtyard, and I must have been about 20, 30 feet behind him. All of a sudden, bang, and down he went. I looked at him. He was shot right through the forehead. He was dead before he hit the ground and the bricks. And seeing the blood just come out, just like a halo around his head. And I knew better than to stop. You never stop. But somehow I just stopped and I looked at him for just counted maybe 5, 6 seconds. And I took off running again. I got to the wall, and whoever shot him didn't shoot again. And then somebody came in beside me, and we went wall to wall and house to house, and we never did see the one that shot him. And we did run in some firefights, and we finally cleared that part of town. And then we came back to the center of off of Suden, and finally we moved out and went to the would be far east end of it, and far west end of town, I think it is. But anyhow, we kind of dug in there, and then we got from that point we went across through an apple orchard into a big tobacco field. And the Germans had managed to maneuver tanks, unbeknownst to us. They maneuvered tanks across one of the bridges. I think they said it was a railroad bridge, but they managed to maneuver tanks across there. And that night, some of their men attacked us. They were grenadiers, and Red Knight and Vetland. Red Knight was the one that ran into him first. Vetland sent him on a one-man patrol at night down a road. And Red Knight finally came back and they ran into these Germans, and of course they confronted them, and the Germans surrendered. And then there was a grenade thrown during the night, and Vetland and Red Knight was both wounded, and the Germans were all killed. And we were told not to withdraw from that position. It was in these big tall tobacco leaves. And the next morning, as it got daylight, which was only a few hours from then, I looked up and I saw, at first I thought it was a bunch of trees moving. I told Bilski, I said, look at the trees moving. And he looked and said, those aren't trees, those are tanks. They were camouflage. So they pulled up, and the first one was a big Tiger tank. And then there were several Panther tanks. And they pulled right up alongside us, within 50 yards. The men were walking behind them on the opposite side of the tanks, and so they came out, and tanks just sat there, and they were just idling their engines, and their men started talking. Well, we didn't know whether to shoot them or not, because there's all these tanks and all this infantry, and God, there was hundreds of them. So the next thing you know, the tanks started raking the tobacco with machine gun fire. These guys were leaning on the tanks with their rifles, waiting for somebody to move and they could kill them. So we tried to make radio contact. Leonard Benson was our radio man. He tried to make contact back to battalion, and he couldn't make contact. So I think it was Don Brennestool had taken over, because Vetland was wounded and had been removed as wounded, and so was Red Knight. So Don Brennestool took over, and he told Benson to go back and ask battalion if we could have permission to withdraw from that area. So Benson made his way all the way back through the tobacco fields, through the apple orchards, all the way back into the town. And they said yes, so we could come back and consolidate in town where we had protection. So Benson worked his way all the way back to us, told us we could pull out of there. And we did. We took off running, just one guy hit now and then. But the Germans could see the tobacco leaves moving, so they opened up with their tank fire and their heavy guns. And I remember one shell went by me. I could hear it cut the air, and it hit an apple tree. Took the apple tree out by the roots, split the tree from the trunk, from the limbs all the way down through the roots, and tore the tree right out of the ground. We had one young guy with us. He was carrying a machine gun. Well, he was a little guy, so I said, let me have the machine gun and you take my rifle. So anyway, we just started out. He went ahead of me, and all of a sudden he got hit. Almost severed his right foot, all down his right side. Luke easily stopped, gave him a shot of morphine, and dragged him into a ditch, and we left him there. And I carried the machine gun, and we went from there. one of the lieutenants, I can't remember his name right now, running through the apple trees, there was some barbed wire fences up, ran into a barbed wire fence and was cut so severely that he had to be evacuated later after we got back to town. But anyhow, we got almost back to town through the apple trees. The German infantry by this time was firing on us. The machine guns were firing at us. The 88s and 75s were firing at us. We finally got to this big drainage ditch, and it stunk just like an outhouse. And it was quite wide. There was only like one little plank across it, and all this muck. You'd have to go down about 10 feet or so, 10, 12 feet down into this muck. The muck come up over your belt buckle, and it was stinking of stuff. Raw human sewage is what it was from the town. And work your way across and climb up the other bank. In the meantime, they're still shelling us and still shooting us. So we did. We got across the town. Even the men were getting hit even then. And I saw them bring in Wolf. He was originally from Texas. And they was carrying him face down, 4 men, one on each arm, one on each leg, and they're running up towards this big windmill where we kept some of our wounded. And he was face down and blood was pouring from him just like from a bucket. And of course I didn't see him after he was put with the wounded, and we went on with the fight and everything, but he survived the war, and he was killed in an automobile accident shortly after the war was over. But we made our stand in the town, and the streets were so narrow that the tanks, German tanks, finally did get to us, and there was a big Tiger tank tried to get in this little narrow road, and his tank treads were wider than the road, and he couldn't get in between the houses. Well, there was some glider troops there, and they had a 57 millimeter anti-tank gun. And he said, well, I'll get him. And he fired around at that tank, and that tank got his muzzle into that little street, and this guy says, oh, no. Phillips and I jumped over the wall, and it was a pigsty, and we landed flat face first in about 2 feet of pig mess. And that stunk. Well, we were already stinking anyway. So this glider man who had the 57 millimeter, he started trying to pull the firing pin. I said, get out of there, you get killed. He says, got orders, got to take the firing pin first. And he got the firing pin out of the gun, and he came over, and just as he cleared the fence, that 88 on the big Tiger opened up, and it just blew that 57 into tinker toys. I mean, it was just scattered all the way down the road. So anyway, he kept shelling, and he couldn't reach us. He couldn't traverse his turret, and I guess he backed up, because if he stayed there, he was afraid somebody had locked his bogey wheels, and he'd be a sitting duck. So anyway, we held the town, and they held the outside of the town, and that was the one place where Justo Korea, we were hungry again, and we didn't have nothing to eat again for a while. And we were behind one house. When I carried the machine gun, somebody else had the tripod. Well, when the young guy got hit, he lost the tripod. He had the tripod, or someone else had it. But anyhow, we lost the tripod. I lost my rifle. And all I had was a machine gun. So we got behind the house, and I had to set the machine gun on a rock and fire it. But Justo Korea, he saw the guy coming out of the house next to us, and a little drainage ditch went between the two houses. There was a plank across it. He says, I want to get, and the guy came out carrying a jar of cherries. I want to get some cherries. So he says, there was a goat standing there. He said, look out, goat, here I come. Well, he ran across that plank, and that plank, of course, when he got to the center of it, started bouncing. He got out of rhythm with it. He bounced up and down, and the German tank started firing at him. He finally got across. He got a whole armload of these jars of canned cherries, and he came back, and that's the first thing we had to eat again for a day was canned cherries. And we held that town like that, against the tanks and one thing and another, until we were ordered to withdraw. And there's a little known story about that, I don't know how long we did hold, a couple of days or a day or whatever it was. But anyway, we finally had orders to withdraw from that town because it was found that it was not good strategy when the enemy could hit you from 3 sides and was killing your men every day. And your movements were very limited, and you couldn't retaliate, and they had tanks and everything there, so they told us to withdraw. And they had an order of withdrawal, and A Company was to be last. But even then, A Company, they said there would be a holding. line while the company withdrew. So they put Lieutenant Borelli in command. He picked Phillips and me, and there was two other troopers, and I can't recall. It always seems to me like one of them was Liddell, but it wasn't Liddell because he was hit in Zahn on the DZ, just off the DZ, and he never came back for a long, long time. Came back in time for Bastogne. So it wasn't Liddell, but it was four of us. It was four troopers and Lieutenant Borelli. And they gave us three machine guns. And we were to set up and let the whole outfit withdraw. Well, anyway, we were set up with the machine guns. There's four of us, Lieutenant Borelli, and I think three machine guns. And they told us to hold through the night until the next morning, that we were not to withdraw until it got daylight. This gave the outfit opportunity to move back down the road and dig into a secondary line of defense. So we stayed there, and that was spookier than the devil, because here we have miles of front, and there's only 5 men, 4 men and a lieutenant. And they said if the Germans did attack in force with tanks and infantry, the whole ball of wax, we were just supposed to stay there and keep shooting, and till we were gone, you know. So we did, and that was lonely. I remember sitting by that machine gun. I said, oh, well, I hope they don't come through. And we did see one probe patrol. We was getting down close to the ground, and you could eyeball, and we could see a 4-man patrol come in far to our left, and they crossed in behind our lines and made a circle, and I don't know which way they went back, I guess. And we said, well, now they know there's no opposition. They're going to move everything in daylight. We're going to get hit by the whole crew over there. And as it turned out, they didn't attack it right at daylight, but you talk about a lonely feeling when you see your whole regiment pull out. And you hear the last man walking down the road, and you can hear the shuffle of his shoes at night, and you hear a little pebble kicked across, and then finally the sound gets less and less, and they're gone, and you're there by yourself with a whole country of enemy in front of you and tanks and everything, and you're sitting there. So anyway, they did pull back, and I asked Borelli several times, it was just getting daylight, and hey, Lieutenant, can we go now? And he said, not yet, not yet. He was a pretty cool guy. And no problem. So anyway, we sat there, and finally it got light enough. He said, okay, pack it up, we'll leave. So we each carried a machine gun and walked back down the road. Well, we got back to where the outfit had dug in. And we saw them. We went past the outfit. First outfit was an apple orchard. It was a crossroads, and it was an apple orchard. And the apple orchard was shaped in an L on one side of the corner of the road. And we walked by, there's what we thought was British soldiers. They were camped, and they even had little pup tents up, and some of them there was a hand pump out in the middle of the field, and they were going filling their canteens. And so we walked past them and made a right turn, and there was A Company dug in, and some of them were going over from time to time getting water from the pump. And all of a sudden one guy looked over there and he said, hey, those aren't British, they're Krauts. So he opened fire, and all of a sudden the shooting erupted, and they were Germans. And here they were bivouacked, and later, after all the shooting was done and over with, and the Germans had found what was left of them finally surrendered, they said they saw the Americans moving down the road, go past them, but they thought they were all prisoners. But you know, here they were carrying mortars, machine guns, rifles, and I don't know why they would think they were prisoners. So they couldn't have been a good quality group of troops, as far as I know. But we did have a big shootout with them for about an hour. And the man in front of me, I was behind an apple tree. I hadn't even had time to dig a hole yet. I just had a little hole about 18 inches deep, or if it's that deep. And the man in front of me was struck through the head, and the brain spattered all over me and into my rifle. And I was firing my rifle, it got hot, and the brain started cooking and steaming, and it stunk. And Benson yelled over at me, he said, for God's sake, Burgett, throw that rifle away. I said, it's the only thing I've got. And So anyway, after the firefight was all over with, we lost some men. They lost a bunch of men, and they finally surrendered to us. And they lined up on the road. And right after they was lined up, and our medics went down and started helping them, they're wounded. And we would try to give them these sulfadizing tablets, and they didn't want to take them, and they thought they were poison. He said, for God's sake, if we wanted to kill you, all we do is shoot you. We don't have to give you poison. So they talked to the commander, battalion commander of the Germans, and he explained it to them. So they all took their sulfadizing and took treatment from our medics. And just about that time, there was a flight of American bombers came over, and I have never seen so many aircraft in my life before or since. From left to right, there was bombers, wingtip to wingtip, and when they went over, the first planes had gone over the horizon, the other planes were still coming. And this one German looked at me, and he just shook his head, and he had tears in his eyes. He says, Deutschland is alles kaputt. It's alles kaputt. But anyway, we did capture that German battalion, and it was strange that they were dug in, and the apple orchard was in a shape like this on a road, and the Germans were here, and we were here, and we walked past them and into our outfit, and they saw us carrying guns, and they thought we were prisoners. But anyway, the Germans took control of Eindhoven at that time, and we were out. So then our battle, I'd have to stop and think for a while to find out where we were at after that. Want me to start over?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we were, one point at that time that we were in Eindhoven, we were put into a lookout post in like a 3-story house that overlooked a dike toward the German-held land. And since Vetland was gone, Brennestuhl became acting platoon sergeant, and Luke Easley became acting squad leader. So while we were in this house, we were set up on the top floor, and we set the machine gun on a desk, a regular office desk, looking out the window over the dike. And we had a good view of the German-held property there, and we'd take our binoculars and watch for any kind of sign of life, and of course they were doing the same to us. Well, after the second day there, we took turns on the gun, sleeping downstairs, and had our men on the gun up on the top floor. So we finally got orders to pull out of there. I forget who was on the machine gun at that time, but they tried to take the belt out of it, and somehow it was stuck. And he couldn't get the belt out, couldn't get the top latch cover off, and so I said, I don't know what we're going to do. We can't be dragging this machine gun around with a whole belt, a can of belted ammunition on it and a tripod. So Luke Easley, without thinking, says, here, give me that damn gun. How should I do it? He pulled the trigger. Well, he squirted a line of tracers out over into German territory. And we said, well, we got to move it now. We grabbed the gun, belt, dragging, and everything down the stairs, and those Germans were quick. They slammed an 88 shell through that house real quick. And I don't know how they can do it that fast, but they did. By the time we got the gun, we were halfway down the stairs. The shell came through the bottom window, blew the stairways out, blew the bottom floor out from underneath us. We went down the stairwell. Just timber, stairs, men, guns. And we went all the way into the basement. We were all piled up. We looked like Beetle Bailey down there, all beat up after the sergeant got there. We were all in all this timber, stairways, and everything down the basement. We finally had to get the gun, and we crawled up out of the basement, got out, and I told Luke Easley, I said, don't ever do that again. But they blew that just about the whole first floor out from underneath us. And we fell from the second floor through what used to be the stairway, down the stairwell into the basement. And it's a good thing the shell went underneath us was going out, so all the fragments, when they exploded, all the fragments went outwards. And another time in Eindhoven, we were... things are coming back. We were in this, by the big windmill where we had our wounded, and we were told, Lieutenant Muir was told to take us and secure one edge of the town. Well, we got over to the edge of town, and he sent, Muir sent me and Phillips, and I think Husto up ahead. So we were clearing the streets ahead of these guys, and we got to a house, and we said, well, it looks like a good place. We'll go in here and set up in the house. And I opened up the back door, and it was barking dog was in there, and man, he's barking. And so about that time, there was a German started firing a Schmeiser. He was up on the roof of the house across the courtyard. And he's firing at us with a Schmeiser. We start to run in the basement, and this dog come growling and barking at us. So we'd run outside, and the Germans shoot us. We ran back inside. The dog would come after us. It was dark in there. We couldn't see. Finally, I fired several rounds, and so did Phillips up at this German on the roof. And we couldn't really see him, but we fired at where we thought he was. And he quit shooting. Whether we hit him or not, I don't know. And so we were saying, I'm not standing out here, dog or no dog. And we ran inside. It shows you, you're getting shot at, but whether you get bit or shot, you have a choice. We're running back and forth in and out of this door. And anyway, this dog turned out to be a little bitty dog. He was scared, and he was trembling, and I finally picked him up, and he was only about that long. And later on, we got to call him Shrapnel because when Lieutenant Muir got up there, we discovered there was a big underground bunker just to the left of the house, running parallel with a dike. And so we went in there, and that's where we stayed rather than the house. And we stayed outside watching for the Germans. But when they heard artillery, they'd bring in the artillery intermittently, no set time. They just send a big barrage of artillery, and then a few minutes later, another barrage. So every time the artillery came in, when we could hear it coming in and knew it was going to land closer, it'd all run inside this big underground bunker. Well, this dog learned that real quick, and it got to where he would hear the shells coming before we would. All of a sudden, we see this dog ears go up, and he'd start running to the bunker, and we start running, and we get there just before we could even hear the shells. But we always had a head start on him then. So we said every time the dog ran for the bunker, there was shrapnel flying, so we called the little dog Shrapnel. And we kept him with us till we got clear back to France after that. We carried him with us all the time. But he knew when we seen that dog ears go up and he started running, no matter where we were at, we knew shells were coming. He'd hear them before we would. And anyhow, while we were there, this young blonde paratrooper that I was telling you that was a ski trooper and transferred into our outfit, and he was in our plane. My plane, he was a man ahead of me, and we saw that hole blown in our wing. Ran in the bunker one time, and he had a folding stock carbine. He had it across his lap, and this bunker had benches on either side with storage underneath him. And his carbine went off and hit the man next to him in the chest. And so Lieutenant Muir sent me back to the windmill to get plasma. And when I went out, the artillery started up again, and it was really hitting, and I had to get behind a wall and crawl. And finally, after going through the artillery, I think there was 2 or 3 barrages while I was going there, and there's a couple of barrages while I was coming back. But I made my way back through the barrages, and I brought the plasma with me. And the man didn't last too long after that. Lieutenant Muir said, "What took you so long?" And that made me feel bad because I did everything. I was running as fast as I could, and then when the shells come in, I hit the ditch and get up and run again. And it made me feel like I didn't do enough. But anyway, the bullet, this young blonde replacement that came in, the bullet had gone through the center of his finger. I don't know, he had the folding stock carbine like this, and for some reason his finger was over the end of it. The bullet went through his finger and cut a perfect hole in his finger. But it went in the center of this other trooper's chest. And the other trooper had lived a couple hours, I guess. We gave him plasma and everything, but he died. And the young blonde trooper, I don't recall his name now, but because he came in just before we jumped in Holland, and he was gone right after that. They transferred him out of the squad almost immediately. He didn't stay with us. And whatever happened to him after that, I never saw him again. But anyway, then we finally had our withdrawal from Eindhoven, which I described, that we were, Borelli and Phillips and I were sitting on the machine guns when the regiment pulled back. And so we were the last ones. Borelli, Phillips, myself, and 2 others were the last troopers out of Eindhoven.
Did you go back into it again at some time in the future, or did you never go back into
We
town?
never, that I recall, we may have gone to the outskirts of it from time to time, but we never went in and really took over that, at least not my regiment or my company.
Oh.
Okay, well,
Well, this is one time that we pulled back from the Alpha-Suden area, and we came down a little road that it seemed like it curved as we were coming south. It turned kind of right and then left. But in that area, there was another tobacco field. Now we bivouacked there for a few days, but a German tank, Tiger, approached our area, and this one bazooka man, I didn't know him personally, but we were in the tobacco field, and he fired a round at the tank, and a lucky hit. The right track was disabled, and the tank slid off into a ditch, and it slid in with the left bow at first, and then he tried to get out, and the tank worked its way down to where it was stuck with the whole left track in and the right track up on the crown of the road. And in this position, he couldn't, with the track disabled, he couldn't get out, couldn't back out or drive out, and in this position, he couldn't traverse the turret to use his guns. And so this bazooka man hit the tank a couple more times with his rockets, and he ran out of rockets. So he started calling for more, and we were deployed through the tobacco field. So everybody that had a bazooka rocket with him would throw one man to the man up in front of him, and he would in turn throw it to the next man in front of him, and so on. And in turn, they finally got to this bazooka man who had gotten up real close to the tank and was on one knee firing his bazooka. And his loader would take the round, and he'd load the bazooka, and he would fire it. And we were counting, and he hit it 14 times. On the 14th rocket, the tank blew, and the tank commander came out through the hatch and went over a telephone pole. These telephone poles, well, we call them telephone poles, electric pole. And he went over the pole, and they're about 40 feet high. And he went completely over the electric pole. But the tank was knocked out, and it was a Tiger. We knocked it out with a bazooka.
Okay, now the way that we're looking at the tank from this picture, is that the side of it that the bazooka man was on, or
Yes,
was he on the other
yes.
side? Okay.
The bazooka man was up towards this area, if you can see my finger, and he was firing it on an angle, and we were deployed in the back here, passing ammo up to him.
Now, did a lot of those rockets deflect off the outer armor then instead of penetrating?
Well, no, you can't tell because the rocket itself is a shaped charge, and what happens is the charge goes forward, and even if the shell of the rocket bounces, the charge still goes forward. But anyway, each one was doing damage, whether it would be critical if the tank were not in that position. It's very doubtful because the Tiger tank is formidable. But he did hit it enough that it finally did blow and did kill the crew. Mm-hmm. They were dead.
So that guy was from another company, the bazooka man?
I don't know if he was from another company or he may have been, but I know that I didn't recognize him at the time. I may have known him even, but at that distance I didn't, because I wasn't up that close. I could see him, and I passed several rounds of rockets up towards him, but I wasn't. I was glad to be back enough where I was. But anyway.
So you think
I didn't recognize him at the time, no.
So you think, no, this was up on the island that this happened and not off of Hell's Highway somewhere?
No, it wasn't on the island. We had left the island, and we were coming back down on the, well, I guess you'd call it the mainland, if you have an island. But it was on Hell's Highway, just off, well, where it made a curve, and there was a little village there because we stayed there a couple of days.
Hmm.
And
so it was below Nijmegen somewhere? Or?
Yes, it was below south of Nijmegen.
But you think it was after Fusden was over with?
Yes, it was after that.
Huh. Okay.
This particular photo, I've seen it even down in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. It's up high on the wall there. But this is some of the group that I was with after we left Ravanaville in Normandy. And this man here is Phillips. This man is Brown. And this one is Jackson. And we came in, well, my group, Phillips was ahead of me, and I was standing back of the camera here. But our group came into this group, and the girls were already giving the wine and cognac to these troopers here, and Jackson happened to be one of them. This trooper here was of Italian descent, but this is Jackson here, Leon Jackson from Texas. And he was in the 2nd squad of the 2nd Platoon, A Company 506. He was our mortar man at that time. And one time we were back in Airborne, England. We were going to town, and we had just received new uniforms. And he was so big that every time he wrote down a size for anything, he would always write down biggest you got. Shoes, biggest you got. Anyway, he got a blouse, jacket, Class A. And it was even too big for him. So we told him, says, come on, we're leaving now. He says, well, I want to tailor my jacket, and it was too big for him. So he pulled the back of it in on both sides, and he took 2 16-penny spikes, ran through with his fingers, and bent those spikes with his fingers. He's one of the strongest men I've ever seen. But anyhow, that's the way he tailored his jacket. He said, it looks good. I said, it looks like hell from the back. He said, it looks good from the front. So anyway, he took those 16-penny spikes, stuck them through, bent them over with his fingers. And we went on in from Airborne into Swindon. And that night, after the pubs had closed, we were coming back home. We'd have to hitchhike, and there was a convoy in town, and they wouldn't allow us to get on the trucks with them. So there was about 11 men in this last truck in the convoy, and Jackson told them, he says, well, you're either going to take us into town or nobody's going. So these guys said, well, you can't get on our truck. He says, okay, come off of there. And they came out, a big 6x6 truck, and they were jumping over the tailgate, and he would hit one and then the other, and he knocked out all 11 of them, had them piled up there. And so Phillips and I said, well, we ought to drag him off the road. He said, leave him. And I said, well, during the blackout, some cars ought to run over him. He said, that's their problem. So anyway, he went up to the driver and he says, get this thing moving. The guy said, the driver said, I can't leave the convoy. He said, you either will or you're going to be back there with them. So we got on the truck and the driver drove us back to where we were at in Airborne. And so the next day we were, without knowing why, the whole company fell out and said, well, they had an officer and we recognized this driver. They were coming down the ranks, and what this officer wanted was to know why this truck pulled out of his convoy, and then when he was told why, he wanted this driver to identify the man that was beating up everybody. And of course, we were standing in the ranks, and I thought, oh boy, here we get it now, because they're going to get Jackson and they're going to get us. But anyway, this little guy come by and he looked up at Jackson, and you could see the recognition in his face, but he just walked on by, and then finally the officer says, you didn't recognize anybody? He said, no, sir. He didn't recognize no one. He wasn't about to. Well,
Yeah.
okay, well, this photo here, these are men of A Company 506. And this is Jerry James. He's from Wyandotte, Michigan. And he bragged about being a bootlegger back in the good old days, down in Downriver area, around Wyandotte and through that area. And Charlie Sire, I didn't know where he's from. I can't think of it, but I don't think I ever did know. And this caption says that this is
Jack Bram.
pardon? This is Jack Bram right here. But anyway, they said this was Charlie Sire. But Jack Bram, he's still alive. Jerry James died of cancer. I don't know about him. Jack Bram is still alive, and when I last heard, he was in a nursing home in a wheelchair. This is said to be Charlie Sire, but it is not Charlie Sire.
Do you know who it is? Or?
No, I don't know who it is, but Charlie Sire wore the GI glasses, the big stainless steel rims on them, and he was our another one of our bazooka men, and he was the best bazooka man I've ever seen. But when we first were issued the paratrooper bazooka, which came in half, you would take and with a half turn, it had lugs on it, and you could turn it and lock it together, make a full-size bazooka, or unlock it, and use the two halves together to put in a bag for jumping, for parachute jumping. That's the reason it came in half. But Charlie Sire used to take and break it in half and shoot it like that. And he carried a big woolen muffler, scarf, and he would take canteens of water and soak this muffler with the water, wrap it over his head and around his face till only his stainless steel rimmed glasses were looking out. And then he'd fire that like a sawed-off shotgun. And he said it works just as good because once a rocket gets on its way, that's the rocket power that keeps it going. And he would fire that sawed-off bazooka that way. But the backflash from the bazooka rocket leaving the short tube would set him on fire, even though he'd wet it down. And so he'd fire it, and all of a sudden he would yell, "Put me out, put me out." And he'd be smoking all over, and we'd take our canteens and pour water on him and put him out. But he would do it again.
He actually did that in combat, fire that thing that way?
Yeah. Yeah, he fired it.
Did he fire it at all at Fused in when you were there or around there? Or?
No, he never fired it. We didn't have them then. They came back with the long bazookas after that. They did. We didn't carry that kind in Holland. We carried the long ones.
Where did he have the short one?
In Normandy.
Oh, really?
Normandy, yeah. In Holland, we had the long bazooka. That when you pulled the trigger, had an elongated trigger and had a tooth ratchet. That when you pulled it, it would spin the little generator and generate enough voltage to set the rocket off.
And that was the full-length bazooka?
Yeah.
The takedown one had batteries then?
Right.
Okay. I have 7 minutes left.
Well, this other story is about Slick Hohenscheit. He, when we finally got out of Holland and all these other places, we were short on uniform supplies, shoes, boots, and so on. So we were told we couldn't have paratrooper boots, and we were the paratroopers. So anyway, we went to town, and here we are with old beat-up combat boots, and all the rear echelon guys, officers especially, colonels, majors, generals, so on, all had shiny paratrooper boots. But now we couldn't, as paratroopers, couldn't get them, but the rear echelon straight legs are wearing them in town. And Slick Hohenscheit went to Reims along with a group. They took us in by truckloads at a time, or convoy at a time. And he ran into a major who was rear echelon, straight leg, and he was wearing paratrooper boots. Well, that struck Slick Hohenscheit at the wrong time, and Slick Hohenscheit beat the hell out of him, put the boots to him, and cut his boots off him with a knife. And well, he called the old major, he called him a straight leg, non-jumping son of a bitch, and he beat the hell out of him, and he cut his boots off. And he said, "You're the reason why we can't get any jump boots." And so anyway, the major called for MPs and everything. Well, they finally arrested Slick Hohenscheit, and then had him in a stockade, and Lieutenant Borelli effected his release. Well, then came out, and Borelli told him to get back to camp and don't go anyplace else and stay there. So anyway, Slick Hohenscheit stopped off before he went there. And he came out of the bar, wherever it was, and they ran smack into the same major with the black eyes and puffed up lips. So he started yelling for MPs, and of course Slick Hohenscheit took off on a run. And then after he got back to the outfit, we were finally went up to Bastogne and went into a little place outside of there. And at this time, the war was getting close to an end, they figured, so they wanted to send a combat man from different units back to the States on a war bond drive. So our company said, okay, we're going to send a man back right from combat, and he's going to hit the States and go on a tour for one war bond drive. So we all put our name on a little piece of paper and put it in a steel pot helmet. And Borelli had somebody draw the lucky name. Well, unbeknownst to us, this major was still gunning for Slick Hohenscheit. He was not going to let up on him, and he had the MPs out for him, a wanted poster, so to speak, and he was still after him. Well, the word got into the company. He knew when they put him in the stockade, he was from A Company 506 and so on, so he was after him. And so Borelli, unbeknownst to us, had two steel pots, and one of them, he sleight of hand, he got behind him, and the other one he pulled up for the picking of the lucky trooper who would go back to the States, and Slick Hohenscheid's name came out. Of course, out of about 80 names in the pot, they were all Slick Hohenscheid. so what Borelli did, in effect, was get Hohenscheid out of town, clear back to the States. And that way, then the war finally got over, and now everybody's happy, I guess, except for the major. But as I mentioned before, if he's still looking for Slick Hohenscheid, if he catches him and he wants to whip him, you better bring a lunch, because it's going to be an all-day job.
Okay. Okay.
Well, right at the last, just before we were out of Holland, the Germans threatened to blow the dikes, so we were each issued a empty 5-gallon gas can, and that was a life preserver. And we did stay. We were the last ones to leave the 5 Deuce, and the rest of them, the 82nd had left, and we were the last units to be pulled out of Holland after 72 days there. And the Germans did blow the dikes. A lot of our men were up on top of roofs like chickens on a roost, and we had water around us, and we had these empty 5-gallon gas cans for life preserver. And the Canadian engineers came by with assault boats with 50 horsepower outboard motors, and they pulled our outfit out. And later we went back to, on trucks, we went back to a monastery where we had our first hot shower in 72 days.
Was that in Nijmegen by any chance when you had that shower?
No.
It was before you crossed the bridge?
That was before we got, yeah. It was in a monastery. And it was a big room. Well, what I call big, it would take in is what we've got right here. And we went in this big monastery, through in the big hallway and into this one room, and they had all these, I think the engineers, maybe the British engineer, but they put pipes with like sprinkler heads. And we got in there and they said, "You're ready," and they turned it on, and you had to, got wet, and then they turned it off, and then because they just had so much hot water, see, and then you would soap yourself, and then you got 90 seconds or 2 minutes, and then turned it on, and you'd have to get all rinsed off. And
was it cold water? Or?
Well, they had enough hot water for just a spurt.
Let me see your forearm there, Don, where you were wounded in Normandy. I'll
one?
show that on there too. Yeah, that's when you were going through that gate at Bloody Gulch.
Yeah,
and
that's where I got it in Normandy.
But it missed the bone in your arm, actually? Or?
Yeah, well, it didn't hit the bone. It hit right next. The bone was exposed. When that hit, it tore it out like this, and I could lay 4 fingers against the bone. This was all out.
Mm-hmm.
It was ripped open, and the artery was out. It was an artery hanging that far out, like a rubber tube swinging. I could pick my arm up and see it. But that, the doctors did a good job. It runs clear down into here, and they did a good job piecing this all back. And they pulled it together and then let it grow from underneath. Every day they would swab out the new flesh and let it fill in. And these stitches were across the top like banjo strings. But they did a good job on it.
Okay.